Hey Dungebags, what's going on? It's Landon Remixes here, and welcome to my review of the sophomore album from Australian producer Flume. This one is called Skin. Now I had to listen to this one for a couple weeks just to prepare for this review, and I've had this kind of on repeat in the car just trying to think of what to say. Flume is most often known for kind of inventing or popularizing the genre future bass, which I've reviewed a lot of in the last year, so I guess it's fitting that I kind of review something from the person who really made this style popular. Flume was a name I kind of heard tossed around prior to his remix of Tennis Court by Lorde, which was the first track I really was into by him. That one absolutely blew up on top of his You and Me by Disclosure remix, which is probably blown up bigger than most of Disclosure's singles on both of their first and second albums. Future bass is a genre that's kind of grown out of the wonky music genre, electronic trap, and late dubstep. Flume has combined all these styles together extremely well, perfectly, probably a little bit closer to trap in his sounds. And he's done it extremely uniquely, not so much on his first album, but primarily in his remixes and building up to this sophomore album. With the lead single Never Be Like You, which I wasn't really crazy about at the time that it came out, I didn't really know what to expect of this record, and I wasn't even sure if I was gonna dig it. And honestly, when the album was on its very first stream, I did watch the live stream that Flume had on Facebook. I wasn't the biggest fan ever, and I especially wasn't crazy about the middle section, but with every passing listen, this album definitely gets better and better. I've even come to love Never Be Like You, which I didn't really expect, and for the most part this album is kind of trying to take a pop appeal to the future bass sound, which I thought Flume did perfectly. Although there are a ton of experimental tracks on this album, starting off with Helix, continuing into Numb and Getting Colder, 3, and Free, which are all some of the most out there tracks on this one. Starting off with the epic Helix, this one definitely makes for one of my favorites and is a totally mind-blowing intro for this thing. Even within the first two tracks of this album, Helix and Never Be Like You, you can kind of hear what Flume's trying to do with this in Never Be Like You being a little bit more pop and future bass, Helix being very trap-centric and experimental. By the time we get into the third track, Lose It, featuring Vic Mensa, you can really tell the rap collaborations on this one are going to be completely out of the park. This one, along with Smoke and Retribution, are two of my favorites on this. You Know is also a pretty heavy rap collaboration on this one, even if I didn't love it as much as the previous two. Now, Numb and Getting Colder is an interesting one because it's trying really hard to be one of my favorites on this album. The production is absolutely off the wall insane. Definitely one of my favorite productions on the album, but then the vocal appearance is a little bit of a letdown. This one honestly could have been cut down a couple minutes and made a fantastic instrumental, although I really like Kuka's other appearance on this one's not really doing as much for me, and in some places Kuka sounds a little bit too much like what I was expecting from Aluna George's collaboration on this one. In fact, my first listen through this album, I thought that there were 3 Aluna George collaborations because of how similar both of Kuka's tracks sound to what we've kind of come to expect from Aluna George's more poppy sounds and radio hits, which actually made it very surprising for when the actual Aluna George collaboration came onto this one. I was very surprised. It's much darker and down-tempo than just about every other Aluna George track I've ever heard. After Numb and Getting Colder comes the absolutely nuts collaboration with Tovlo, Say It, and I guess the main reason why I'm going crazy over this thing is not just for its absolutely outstanding and hard 808 snares that are just nuts and rolling throughout the drop. I'm really impressed with Tovlo's appearance on this thing. It's been a good long time since I've heard a really good Tovlo song, especially since I was such a big fan of her Queen of the Clouds debut album. This track is everything I feel like I've been missing from Tovlo over the last couple years, with really disappointing collaborations like her one with Coldplay, Fun. I feel like most of her featured appearances haven't been as strong, but this one totally is, kind of taking me back to really why I fell in love with Tovlo's music in the first place on Queen of the Clouds. Just very straightforward and sexual. This one is awesome, and the production is pretty crazy as well. Speaking of which, Flume's production has gotten a ton better since I first heard him, and it's to be expected when the future bass scene has gotten so big. Flume kind of has to reclaim his crown in a way as the king of future bass, and I feel like he's definitely done it with this album because this production is far better than any other future future bass I've heard in the last couple years from anyone else. Like with my first listen, the main downfall of this album is the fact that there are a streak of about 5 tracks in the middle of this thing, and 4 of those are instrumentals. A couple of them, When Everything Was New and Pika, being fairly short and almost unneeded. It makes it worth it in spots though, because Smoke and Retribution is such a fun track, and because all of these appearances are actually pretty good sounding, especially 3. After that section we get Take a Chance featuring Little Dragon, which kind of comes to cement this album's kind of indie alternative feel, kind of bringing those same vibes that of course Porter Robinson's Worlds did, and why I like that one so much. Take a Chance for me kind of brings me back to that sound of Flume's You and Me remix, especially on its drop. It starts off a little bit slower, maybe a little bit toward a house tempo, and then kind of builds into this awesome future bass sound, which I feel like is just a really jamming track. For sure, one of my favorites on the album. It's just very bouncy and enjoyable and happy-go-lucky. Of course, then it's followed by the extremely dark Innocence featuring Aluna George. Then again, we already talked about that one. Like Water is also a very dark track, so that follows Innocence very well. And then we continue into Free, which is a really epic experimental interlude between Like Water and the final track, Tiny Cities featuring Beck. Although I'm not absolutely in love with Beck's appearance on this, just like Numb and Getting Colder, I feel like it's kind of overshadowed by the insanity that is the production on this track, and Flume absolutely kills it with this one. Very emotional chords pushing through the entire thing, along with the experimental future bass sounds that he's been trying to push through on the instrumental tracks of this. It just makes a really awesome closer, and something that makes me want to finish the album, then start it exactly over, play it through again, and put this on repeat all freaking day. I personally love where this album's going, and I'd like to see what he can do next. I think he's gone a great direction, kind of incorporating a pop sound and really making future bass into something that I feel like the masses will really enjoy, but it also has the experimental sounds, which I feel like if people like the pop ones on here, then they're also going to like the experimental ones too. There wasn't a single bad track on this record. Like I said, its major downfall is with a couple of weak vocal appearances and a streak of instrumental tracks, but other than that, there's not much wrong with this album. I'm gonna go ahead and toss this one a solid 9. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this review. It's been a long time coming, and I'm finally excited that I get to push this one out. I'm Landon Remixes. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you later. Peace.